there's some other gap than the gender gap between men and women to achieve the managerial level or the salary level. They have something called the nationality gap. So a lot of Arab expat women or Asian women here, they don't have the same chances as European women they have. So they have facing two problems. The gender gap, they are fighting with the men. And they're fighting also for the discrimination for the nationality opportunities. Like some woman like graduate for Cambridge. So she will have a better chances for the woman, for example, graduate from the Cairo University. So they're facing two gaps here. How can we make sure that we'll break this ceiling, as I said, for the first, the self-barriers, and close those gaps?
Thank you. For the self-barriers question, for the self-barriers question, we will expand on that later. So, but maybe if we try to answer the second one, the nationality gap, and how it affects women. You think in the UAE, I mean in the region or in general?
Let me say this clear. So as she said, a lot of CEO here is still being hooked up by men. So there's way more men in this positions than the women. Unfortunately, and this is a fact here, not only here, on the region, they will give the job for a woman came from London, from Cambridge, than the woman came from the Cairo, Egypt, or else. It's like this kind of gap exists. We can't deny that it exists. Sometimes women, like CEO women, she will choose a woman came from Paris, Sorbonne.
Yeah, but is it a person coming from that particular country or with that educational certificate?
Sometimes
people connect skills.
Yeah, sometimes it's about the university name. Sometimes it came for the fact it's a different nationality.
Okay, so we have employers here. All of them are employers in addition to everything else. So how do you, what's your criteria when it comes to nationality? Question, when employing people, what to do with that?
I think for us, it is really about your credibility, your skills, comparing it to the role that we are looking for. When in Abu Dhabi government, for example, you will see a few women at the level of the CEO. But within this year, or from last year, more and more women are in the executive role, the executive director roles, and more are considered to be CEO. So at that level, the government is focused on ensuring that the appointment of the level becomes from the government, because it is really about ensuring that, when you are setting a board, we need to have women in the board. If you are setting CEO, and depending, for example, on the the type of the entity, for example, if it's an entity about human resources, they would prefer to have a woman who leads it, because it is not black and white, and we are still progressing into having a system that match the talents and the women that we have from expertise and the opportunities that in the market. Today we are getting into a world that has been, it's a monopoly of men, and it takes time to. You can't take out 10 and say, okay, let's have 10 women CEO. It has to come slowly, and then every woman who join, then everyone is looking at her like what she's gonna say next. Will she add value? Is she the right choice? And this is where, every woman who becomes a CEO, there is also that huge focus and evaluation, which will affect the next and the third, and the fourth CEO who will come and join the group. I also want to answer a question that was raised about the, why do we have such system here other than leadership within the UAE? Because we are a tribal, we are a community based on tribal. And within a tribe, if the leader of the tribe say, lead by example, and this is what we want to do, slowly the other tribes and the community starts to follow, because they have this trust system with the leader. And if this is acceptable with the leader, and it's okay to empower women, and yes, women has a role, slowly we saw the change that happened in the UAE. It took time. This was not a switch on and off. But today, because we had an amazing woman, our mothers, grandmothers, and the women who worked with Sheikha Fatima, who did an amazing job, this is today we are having much greater opportunity and much greater flexibility to enter these roles.
Thank you. I'm not sure if do we want to, can we expand on to answer the question on nationality biases? I don't know whether that's gender related, in all honesty.
I'm happy to,
yeah, but Elisa, please
mention
do.
something. So we have 6 team members at Wamina, all of which are women, except we had open applications. So men applied as well, and actually men got to the final rounds of some of the positions, but the women performed better. So we used to have a lot of, we have different barriers to entry. They'd have to do case studies, etc. For our analysts, for example. Our analysts went through like 6 different rounds of trials and case studies before we selected our analyst. They are Norwegian, who grew up in Thailand. We have an Egyptian American. We have an Egyptian who grew up in Abu Dhabi. We have a Filipino girl. We have an American who's lived in DC and Jordan and Palestine for the past like 6 or 7 years. So we're incredibly diverse. I guess because I'm a new generation, and maybe I'm not a conventional business leader. I'm a lot more fair and merit-based, and I understand that there are traditions in business to sometimes treat different nationalities with different value systems. What we look at is education and qualification, and I hired the best of the best. The only way that I saw nationality playing a role was that we got far fewer Emirati applicants, and actually at less than 2% Emirati applicants for any given role, and that's because we cannot compete as a startup with a government salary. And so that's my only note, is that for us in the private sector, no matter how I hire, and everybody, I've like this minimum salary, like everyone, I don't care where you come from or what you do, your role is worth this much, this is what you get. But if I go to an Emirati graduate out of university and say, you want to be our junior analyst, here's the salary for junior analyst, they're going to look at it and they're going to say, I could go to Ministry of Education and get 3 times that amount, for example, as a starting rate. And I can't compete with that. So that is the only way that, for us, nationality really plays a role. And I won't selective hire, and I won't be unfair with a salary. So it just depends on whether we're lucky enough to find somebody passionate enough for the role. I don't really care where they come from.
Any of you want to add something? Heather, please.
Yeah, so, I would think about it in a different way maybe. So it's something that we look at with entrepreneurs. We call it the grit factor. So it's the distance traveled. So if you look at somebody who went to American University of Cairo, comes from one of the elite families, had life pretty easy because they were born privileged, versus somebody who worked really hard, didn't have much money, didn't come from a wealthy family, went to Cairo University, studied engineering, did really well. I'm more likely to invest in the graduate of Cairo University than the AUC graduate, who was never hungry, didn't have to struggle, didn't have to work hard. So we look at something we call kind of the distance traveled. So how far did that person have to travel to get to where they are today? And that changes things a little bit, because then you don't just focus on things like, oh, this person went to Harvard and this person didn't go there, so I'm going to choose the Harvard graduate, because we know that the distance traveled was actually much greater for the person who didn't go to one of the Ivy Leagues or didn't come from a wealthy, privileged background.
I super disagree with that. I'm sorry. I really disagree with that, because I came from a super privileged background, and I have just as much work ethic, for example, as...
It's not work ethic, though. It's also about how hard they had to work to get to where they are.
But it doesn't matter how much you want something.
The barriers they had to overcome, the hurdles that
it doesn't
were in
mean
front
that the work that you put out is going to be any better or any worse. I didn't go to a prestigious university in the slightest. If anything, I went to a slacker university. But I went to, which was, by the way, an incredible university. I highly recommend it. But, I worked my final semester, a 40-hour work week for no pay, waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and classes, because I was passionate. And so somebody to tell me that somebody else, just because they came from, let's say, a lesser privileged financial background, is more justified to get a certain role because they seem to be more hungry on paper, to me, like, I can't agree with.
It's on a case-by-case basis in both situations, I believe. Reem?
Okay, I'm going to talk from my experience as well. So I used to work for an Arab publication, which is part of Abu Dhabi Media, which means it's owned by the government. The editor-in-chief was an Arab expat woman. That was before I joined. When I joined, when she decided to leave, they hired a local woman. So again, I think it was according to qualification, because you had like an expat and a local in the same position. Yeah. And the team that we worked in was a mix of Arab expats and locals, mostly women. We had only one guy in the team. So I never felt the discrimination from my own experience.
Yeah, just to close on this, whether nationality is an obstacle in the UAE. There are a lot of criticism. Just look at my last name. I wouldn't have had a chance at all if the UAE wasn't the country as it is. Somebody once said, "You're a super talented writer, and I'll give you a chance." And I worked really hard still. News, piece writing, day, morning, during the night, never mind. But look at my last name. So if that was true, I really don't think so. That's when it comes to UAE. Worldwide, my Arab friends, who are part of my inner circle, real friends, they're making strides around the world. They are opening doors big time. So I really also don't think that them being Arabs, and some of them are Emiratis, and Arabs, mainly Lebanese and Jordanians, is an obstacle for those who really want to do something. Yes, it's hard. We all go through that, but that's how life goes. So I believe it's fine if we move on the next one. And now I want to first start with Heather, because with the next one is, it often stated that when a woman is appointed to a higher or a board position, that she is somehow only given an opportunity to prove herself further. And that women somehow expect from themselves and others to prove more dedication, more ability, more competence and everything to justify that role, whereas men, it's stated, seem to own that position from day one. So we have Heather, who started quite a few years ago, Women Angel Investors Network. Now you stepped up the game and did something even more with Mindsheet Capital. And you've been member of boards, quite a few of them, and for quite a few years. So can you tell me your experience through all those your ventures that you've been working on? And is it really true? Did you feel that you have to prove yourself more or to work harder, etc.? And then how do you achieve a work-life balance in that scenario, if so?
Yeah, good question. But so on the board question, I think in general, all minorities, including women, we have to work a lot harder to be taken seriously. So I feel like I always have to be 1,000%. You know, I have to be perfect. I have to be knowledgeable. And I've got to be able to back up everything that I say if I have a different viewpoint on a board, which is usually the case, especially if it's a board with all men. Women are different. We have different perspectives, different backgrounds, and come to different views of the world. So when we express that, if we don't have the data and all of the analytics, and maybe that's why I've been so data-driven throughout my career and focused on finance. But when you've got the data, you have to be 100% sure that it's perfect. So I think there's a lot of pressure that women feel to be perfect. You can't say something just kind of off the cuff, and then when you get called out on it, which always happens, you've got to be able to defend it. And there are lots of stories I have about this I won't go into now, but I think also some of the data points around having at least 3 women on a board. There's a board I'm on in Egypt called Sechem. It's the largest organics producer in the region. And it's not a startup, it's been around for 40 years. And there are 9 board directors. So I joined the board 2 years ago, and I was the second woman to join the board. And just recently, a third woman joined, and the dynamic has really shifted. I can tell already with the 3 women on the board, and we've got kind of a little unit. We don't always agree with each other, but we're supportive, and it's a different dynamic when you've got a board with more than 1 woman. So I think that those pressures and the expectation that your all of your information, all of your viewpoints, everything can be proven. That's a lot to ask. In terms of work-life balance, I think women generally, you've probably seen the data, but the number of hours worked per day, whether in the house or out of the house, are just always a lot higher for women. I've got a very liberal husband who is Armenian American, grew up in Saudi, but he and I actually met doing our MBA in business school, so we're equal. I do tell him he's smarter than I am, but I actually believe he is. So I'm not just saying that to make him feel better, but I definitely work a lot more. We've got two young boys, 6-year-old and 8-year-old. So one of my missions in life is to make them feminists. So we'll see if I succeed. I'm not sure that I'm succeeding yet. One of them just told me on Women's Day of all days that he was role-playing with some, the stacked Russian dolls, and he had the little tiny one, and he said, "This is a baby girl. She's going to grow up and get married." And I said, "Okay, great. And what's her work going to be?" "She's going to take care of babies." And I almost started crying and just thought, well, God, all the work that I'm doing, with Venture and trying to change all these results now in my own house, I'm raising this son who, believes this about women. And so then again, I think about the unconscious biases that form as children, from the media we watch, the schools, the teachers, all of these. It's not just the influences in our houses, it's also the society and all the other things that you can't control around them. So I think work-life balance, I still struggle with that. I'm a workaholic. I think this is part of the challenge of being female. We tend to be perfectionists because we have to be that much better to be respected, to be heard, to be valued. And I really hope that this changes this century.
So you think that women do need to work harder to prove themselves, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. I
And
mean, come on,
Lisa?
look at the U.S. presidential election. It's crazy we had this super qualified woman and then the other person that we elect, it's not even, how can you even compare them, So, sorry, I'm American, so I can say this.
Okay, it happens. Elisa?
Do I think women need to work harder to
Do
prove
they
themselves?
really choose to? Do they believe in that? Is it true?
So I'll say that I think we had to fight a little bit harder as Wamina to be taken seriously, not because we were women as much as because we were younger. There was like a definite amount of ageism and the fact that we had very little experience in the finance space when we were starting a finance company, which I understand. However, there's an immediate assumption,